Hello, so good afternoon. My name is Naomi Shira. I am a program manager with the Creative Economy Practice, and I am based out of the Nairobi office. Welcome all to the Fashionomics Africa Accelerator online program. Today, we will be covering corporate governance for small, medium enterprises and startups. Kindly note that the translations are available in English, French, Portuguese, and Arabic. We request that you look for the round interpretation icon at the bottom of the screen to select your language. Today's session will run for 1 hour, 30 minutes with a training session followed by a question and answer session. In today's session, we'll be covering an overview of corporate governance and business structure, an overview of business structures, trends in the Nigerian startup corporate governance, and how they can be extrapolated in a Pan-African context. Welcome to today's session, and while you wait, please turn on your cameras if you can, and share in the chat what you're looking to get out of this session. Before we start, here are some ground rules. Please switch on your camera if you can. Use the chat box to ask questions. Raise your hand if you want to say something. What we discuss stays here. Mute your microphone unless you want to speak. Participate actively. Give space to others to participate. Please ensure that your Zoom name matches your registration name. This is for the purpose of taking attendance. Please note that attendance will be taken at any time during the session. So again, you are requested to ensure that your Zoom name matches your registration name so that you're not marked absent. So before we move on to introducing today's facilitator, we request that we pay special attention as usual and participate as usual, because we will have a very pleasant surprise for one lucky winner today, which we will be announcing at the end in the question and answer session. So enjoy today's session, pay attention, and participate. So today we are truly honored and privileged to have Olaitan Adedeji, who is an associate director at PricewaterhouseCoopers Nigeria, with over 16 years experience in legal and regulatory services, government relations, compliance, risk management, transaction structuring, and contract management. She is the firm's general counsel and heads the regulatory compliance and advisory unit. As a dual qualified lawyer with legal training across 3 countries. Olaitan has an excellent grasp of legal and regulatory regimes in the United Kingdom, Canada, and Nigeria. Olaitan holds an LLM in oil and gas law from the University of Aberdeen. She's a member of the Nigerian Bar Association, Law Society of Ontario, Canada, Chartered Institute of Arbitration, United Kingdom, and a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Taxation of Nigeria. We're excited to have you here today, Olaitan, and look forward to a great learning session on corporate governance for small, medium enterprises and startups. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Naomi. It's a great pleasure and honor to be here and talking with great minds today. It's not just about passing on what I know today. It's also a lot about learning from everyone in the room. So I hope we have a lively discussion. I hope the various experiences that we have, we're able to bring them to bear so that everyone in the room can live better, more fulfilled, with deeper understanding of next steps. So without much ado, I'll move on to what are our learning objectives today. We're hoping that at the end of today's session, we would have a good understanding of the meaning of governance and corporate governance. Governance in the wide sense, and then corporate governance as it affects a business entity. We're hoping that we would be able to understand the different business structures in Nigeria as a case study, because we know that there are participants from all over Africa. So we're just taking Nigeria as a case study because being a Commonwealth country, we have similar regimes across Africa, at least with the Anglophone African countries. We're hoping that would understand the minimum requirements for a startup. And then we're hoping that would identify the business structures that NCCG 2018 is applicable to. That's the Code of Corporate Governance. We would discuss the philosophy behind the code, which incidentally cuts across a number of African countries as well. They have similar codes. And then would identify the principles and discuss the main highlights of the code. So going straight into it, I would request that if you have questions, we just keep dropping in the chat box. I may not be able to see them now because I'm sharing my screen, but Naomi would help collate the questions and we can take them at the end of the session. If there's anything that's unclear, please let me know. And if there's any part that you'd like us to dwell on a little longer, please let me know as well. So today's agenda would examine what governance is, the different business structures that exist, governance for startups, because of course, different companies have different kinds of governance structure they would need, some more sophisticated than the other. For instance, a public liability company obviously needs to have a more complex, more robust governance structure than a simple business. Would examine the Nigerian Code of Corporate Governance, would highlight the code, portions of the code that are relevant to us and its application to regulated startups. Okay, so before we proceed with a lot of information to absorb, let's get into this icebreaker quickly. So if you were able to travel through time, either forward or backward, where would you go? If backward, to what time period and why? If there was a person you could go back in time and meet, who would it be and why? And would you just want to visit and come back, or would you want to stay there? So please, let's start typing. Let's go into the comment section and type our responses. I can go first. If I were to go back in time, I probably would go to my primary school playground, because at that time, the only worry I had was who was cheating on the game. I had no bills to pay, no school fees. So yeah, I think those were the happiest times. So let's keep our responses coming.
So Laitan, we have quite a number of responses.
Okay.
We have, I'll go back when I was a baby and was dotted on. I'll go back in time when I was a child. So there's a lot of nostalgia around being a child. Let's see, Labake, if you could please assist me with the translation from the various languages to English, I'd appreciate. I'd go back to my secondary school to relive my childhood memories and make friends. Again, there's quite a bit about going back in time as a child. I travel back and try to know more about my family. I'll go to my university to study a course in line with what I'm doing currently, fashion design related. I'll go back to my secondary school days. I'll want to meet my children. I would go back to Paris. I would go back to my childhood and stay there. Life was pure and people were genuine. Yeah, Dalton is a hoax. If I was go back, it would be to the 90s. I would meet Brenda Fassie and Lebo Mathosa, as that was a vibrant time in South Africa and Kwaito scene, both fashion and music. Someone says I'd go forward. So I get to the light at the end of the tunnel. I'm going through it right now. Someone else again would go forward to meet the future self and see if they've succeeded. If I go backwards, I'd start sewing earlier, maybe, and learn from my grandmother. Another one would go to the future. I would like to see how everything I planned for turned out. I would go backwards to high school because I'd like to utilize the mindset I have now. I would make better decisions. I would go back to stay. There's a lot of unlearning that a teenager needs. Someone would want to choose their career again and go into fashion. You're in the right place. I'll go back to my university days. I would go forward to see how the world would be in some decades. My name is Rabia. I would go to London and Switzerland where I was studying and start in a better way. I would go back to my early 20s, so much fun, energy, and anticipation. Everything was possible. And just an addition to that comment, hangovers were more bearable. I love to see my grandmother, and I would like to visit again Japan, my favorite country, plenty of inspiration 10 years ago. Someone, future smart city, flying cars, smart textiles. Backward 1996, December, this is specific, December 26th, 3 p.m. to meet my father. Tell him not to go out to the family meeting. That's sad. Sorry about that, Ibo. I would like to go back. I would like to educate myself about savings. So we have a lot of comments streaming in. I think like right now, I'm about over 100 comments not read. Wow. I don't know how you... So maybe say we take 10 more and then
okay, absolutely.
Okay. So I like to go back to my secondary school days and start proper networking till my university days. I would want to go into the future to enjoy all that I've achieved and celebrated my achievements. I would like to go back, correct all my wrongs. I'll go back to my high school and choose a career as a fashion designer. I'll go back and I'd love to meet Albert Einstein to learn from him all his theories. We have a scholar in the room. Backward, a designer, Valentino's Place, Paris, I think, to learn fashion his way. Back in time to meet my grandmother who taught me kindness and being independent and the history of our family. Someone is very specific here. I'll go back to when I was 12 years old. I started having a passion for fashion and cloth making at this age, and I would have to make a better choice of pursuing this passion all through secondary school and university. I would like to go back 10 years to do an entrepreneurship training. Someone wants to go to the future to meet their descendants. I'll go back in time. I miss my sister. She was a sister, a mother, a friend. She gave me everything. Quite some teary, nostalgic comments coming up. So
okay, thank you so much, Naomi, and thank you for all the lively contributions. Some were funny, but a lot were deep. And yes, I miss my grandmother as well. It looks like a number of us miss our grandmothers. And she was so full of wisdom. She was unlearned, but she had native intelligence that I still remember and I still find very relevant today. So yes, I wish I had listened to her more. I wish I had spent more time with her. So that's definitely one I would love to go back to. And I appreciate the people who would look forward and go forward and see, okay, how did this all pan out? But there'll be. But I noticed, apart from the nostalgic going back, there's also a lot of, I'd go back to redo some things. I'd go back knowing what I know now to do things differently. And yeah, we all have those moments, but I would say that the next best time to do things differently is now. If you don't have the benefit of going back, then let's go forward and start doing things differently, even if it means little changes that we have to make. And if that's the benefit we're going to derive from today's session, then I'll be very fulfilled. Make small changes that could have long-lasting impact on you and on your business. So thank you again for the icebreaker, and thanks Naomi for helping out read those comments. So what is governance? Any takers generally? This is not a legal definition, but what do we just understand as governance? Maybe just one or two comments.
They are yet to come in.
Okay.
So there's laws and regulation to lead.
Okay.
Processes,
Okay.
leadership, leading and managing, ethics.
Oh, okay. Excellent. So looks like a number of us are not rookies at all. We're quite familiar with what governance is about, and we could throw these words around. So it's managing, it's integrity. We talked about ethics, it's processes, collaboration, engagement, shareholders, stakeholders, ethics, fairness, policy, technology, and these days we talk a lot about sustainability. We can't start making governance decisions without thinking about sustainability. And sustainability is not just, oh, the environment, because that's what comes to mind these days. It's not just the environment, it's not just how are you impacting the world around you. Sometimes sustainability is about your business itself. What are you doing now that would ensure that the business outlives you? What are you doing now that would ensure that if anything happens to you, the business keeps going? Your children are not going to inherit a debt they did not incur. Your children would reap the benefits of the decisions you're making today. So there's also sustainability in that sense. And how you structure your business, the governance around your business could make this happen or could make it just a dream. So all these buzzwords you tend to find around governance. So corporate governance specifically is what we're looking at today. There are different kinds of governance, as we have said. It could be political, it could be religious, family, academic. I mean, in our families, I'm sure we have the way things are ordered. Who makes what decisions? So your 5-year-old, for instance, is not able to say, this is the school I want to go to, this is the school I do not want to go to, and there's nothing you can do about it. No, that decision is not theirs. Your older children, or even all the children, can have a saying, oh, this is the house we like, this is the neighborhood we like, but they're not the ones that are going to make the final decision because the money is not coming from them, the mortgage is not going to be paid by them, and other factors. So even in a family, there's hierarchy, there's a process, there's a way things are done. And I recall growing up, I was the last, and I was the one who could get anything out of, my mom. So if the older ones needed anything, they would come through me and say, just tell mommy you want it, just tell mommy you want it. And I'll go and say, okay, this is what I want, blah, 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 and it happens. Because we've sort of recognized that, okay, this is how to get what you want. Whether we like it or not, that's a process. in the family. At the end of the day, you're getting what you want. So everywhere, in a church, in a mosque, in other religious settings, you would have a hierarchy. There'll be the lead man, there'll be the assistant lead man or woman, the assistant, the support, and it tends to go like that. So it's the same way everywhere. In whatever institution we find ourselves, there's always a structure. And ignoring this structure is the beginning of anarchy, because everything just starts to break down, whether we like it or not. So the whole essence of governance is, how do we organize ourselves? How do we ensure that we keep our eyes on the ball such that we build a structure that would achieve the purpose for which we were set up, without frustrating everyone along the lines, without stifling decision-making, and without making one part seem less important than the other. So today we're focusing on governance as it relates to business structure, and that's what's called corporate governance. Yes, I'm sure we've had, although I'm sure there are a lot of younger people, Gen Zs around today, but most of us would have heard of or were around at the time a number of corporate scandals happened all over the world, actually, but it was in the US that it was largely reported. Who remembers the Enron scandal? Enron, anybody? I can't be the oldest in the room, surely. Thank you, Anna. Yes. Oh, thank you. I know that someone else has raised their hand, but I can't see.
There's a couple of them in the chat. Definitely, we do have a couple of millennials. They clearly have memory of the Enron. Arthur
Yes.
Anderson, someone just mentioned that. Yes.
Exactly. So I started my career with KPMG Nigeria, and that was shortly after the broke out of Arthur Anderson, because of the scandal, and they had to regroup and come under KPMG. So the Enron scandal was very much a story around the firm and the impact of it. And it's a classic breakdown of corporate governance. And we saw the impact of that. I mean, it drags the largest audit firm in the world at the time. I mean, all the other big fours were happy and content being 2, 3, 4, 5. None of them went close to Arthur Anderson. And Enron didn't just come down, it dragged Arthur Anderson with it, to show you how corporate governance can have devastating effects, or lack of it. And the same thing was seen during the financial crisis in Nigeria. I don't know if we recall those times as well. There were a lot of failed banks. In fact, they had to set up a failed bank tribunal, and the revelations were incredible. The way the loan approval processes, the way debts were converted to bad debt without due process, the way directors were taking loans as directors in their capacity as directors. There were a lot of things that were wrong, and it looked as if it was a party free for all. And the nation suffered. People's careers suffered. Some people have still not recovered to this day. So at that time, it started emerging that there's a need to pay close attention to how businesses are governed. Even if it is a one-man business, there has to be a structure in place. There is nobody that should have unbridled powers in a company. So the US's response to that was the Sarbanes-Oxley Act in 2002. The act is very onerous, it's very strict. There are strict compliance requirements. And I would go into the difference later on between the US's response to corporate governance failure and the UK's response. There are two completely different responses, but aimed at achieving the same thing. So in Nigeria, this is the sort of history of how we got to where we are today. Again, Nigeria is just we're using Nigeria as a case study. Corporate governance issues cut across the world. Africa is not an exception, and there's some of these narratives that would resonate with you from the rest of Africa as you hear them. So you know that it's not peculiar to one part of the world, or we're not speaking to Nigeria alone. We're just using Nigeria as a case study, as an example for the rest of Africa. So in 1990, the Companies and Allied Matters Act, CAMA, was enacted. It was the military at the time. It wasn't an act, it was a decree at the time, as the militaries used to do. So it was put in place, but that was just lip service to corporate governance, if you like, because it just said, oh, the duties that directors have, it's fiduciary. We've always known that. And fiduciary for non-lawyers simply means directors have a duty of trust. Whatever you're doing as a director is not for your own benefit. You can only act in the interest of the company. So you should not directly benefit as a director from anything you do. I know that's already weird because people don't live that. Directors have used their position to carve out all sorts of benefits for themselves, but that's not how it's supposed to be. Every decision a director makes, it's supposed to be for the benefit of the company and the company alone. So CAMA spoke to that. It also spoke to insider dealing. And insider dealing basically, and that usually happens with public quoted companies, is because you have information, insider information on this company, you know the direction it is going. So you're buying or offloading your shares to make a huge profit, which you would not have made if you did not have the information you have. So that's insider trading, and it's a crime, and it's a big deal in the US, for instance. So CAMA spoke to those things, but that wasn't enough. After a while, the misbehaviors of the banks were starting to become quite obvious. Then they came together, the bankers committee, and they issued some guidance to help their members. Of course, that again was not enough. Then they codified it into a code of corporate governance for banks in Nigeria, again, because our focus was mostly on banks. And understandably, banks have a very central impact on the economy. When banks fail, way more people are likely to suffer than a smaller sector. So for instance, a textile company fails, the impacts would be felt by the members, by the employees, by perhaps the community that has built itself around the textile company, perhaps the factory, by supply chain companies in their supply chain pipeline. But it's worse with a bank. A bank's failure impacts potentially millions. So at that time, the focus was on corporate governance for banks. It was issued by the Central Bank of Nigeria in 2005, after they thought they had cleaned up the banks. In 2008, there was a code of corporate governance for pension operators. So you see how they were starting to expand the reach beyond banks. And then in 2009, there was a code of corporate governance for insurance companies. Again, 2011, they then expanded it for all public companies, because at this time it had become obvious that it is important that companies are governed properly. And this came following the financial crisis. So we saw all over the world what was happening. Nigeria could not sit back and do nothing. So they expanded the reach of Code of Corporate Governance to all public companies. And then in 2013, the federal government inaugurated a steering committee to develop a new Code of Corporate Governance. In 2014, the CBN, or the Nigerian Stock Exchange, also introduced a rating system for companies so that by the rating, you can tell which company is properly governed and which is not. Nigerian Communications Commission also introduced it in 2016, 2017, and it goes on like that, basically until 2019, January 2019. Sorry, let me move this out of the way, where the Nigerian Code of Corporate Governance was officially launched. So that's where we are today. But with all this beautiful journey to where we are today, it's important to note that our Code of Corporate Governance is not a law. It's prescriptive. It's just telling you how best practice you should run your company. It's not going to do anything if you explain why you didn't run it the way it was prescribed. It's just saying this is what you should do. So as we have said, and I'm sure you've gathered up till now, Code of Corporate Governance is a system of principles, rules, policies, procedures, defined responsibilities and accountabilities used by stakeholders to walk through the inherent conflict of interest that exists in the corporate form. So as I have said, a director has a benefit to make. Many times that benefit may not be to the benefit of the company. So there's a conflict of interest. Now, how you resolve that conflict cannot be left to the director's conscience or the director's knowledge or appreciation of what is right and wrong. No, write it down, let it be prescribed. Even small businesses, as you employ people, you notice that if you don't, many times people come and say, oh, they have this issue with that employee and they have that issue. And you ask, okay, this person wants to leave and just comes tomorrow and says, I'm off. Was there an offer letter? Did you even write anything to the person when the person was employed? No. Do you have a staff handbook that states the expectations around what employees can do and cannot do? No. So honestly, you've left it to the conscience of that person to do what the person thinks is right or wrong. So we can't continue working like that and think or hope that we're going to build something sustainable. I won't dwell too much on this because I'm mindful of time, because it's important to then drill down to how it affects small businesses. We might be thinking so far, oh, it's not, I'm not an insurance company, I'm not a bank, I'm just a small company trying to, do what I'm passionate about. But it also affects you because, one, you don't want to remain small forever. You want your business to be taken seriously. If you want to scale up at some point and access funding from the banks would need to confirm what kind of entity are we looking at? Is this company likely to pay the loan back? Are they governed in such a way that we have confidence that they're making the right decisions at every point in time? Or is there one person who makes all the decisions, and if the person is out of the office or the person for some reason cannot come in for a month, the loan is suffering or is going to suffer? So that's what our focus is going to be. So good corporate governance is about intellectual honesty and not sticking to rules and regulations. Capital flows towards companies that practice this type of good governance. Money would always flow to companies that are run properly. That's the truth. You could be passionate, you could be talented, you could be the next best thing. If you do not have a good structure in place, you're just going to be someone who's working a hobby. That is the truth. So let's quickly look at business structures, the types of business structures that are available and that most of us would have keyed into. So there are private companies and public companies. Basically, a private company is a company limited by shares. And it's saying that you have 100, let's use the dollars. You have $100 in share capital. Anna, your $100 in shares is the extent of your liability in that company. It's not going to, they're not going to come to get your house. They're not going to get your car. They're not going to get the clothes off your back because that company is in debt. As long as your $100 has been fully paid for, that's all you owe the company. So people prefer private limited liability or public limited, we'll go into that, because it's easy to separate yourself from the business. So if the business doesn't do well, it's tough luck, but you're safe. Unless, of course, you're a director, you then have some level of personal liability because it's deemed that you were the one making the decisions that led the company to where it ended. So there's a public company and there's private company. Both of them are limited by shares. So if you have shares in Cadbury and Cadbury goes bankrupt, they're not going to come and get you. At worst, you're going to lose your $500 that you had as shares in Cadbury. That again is limited liability. Your liability is limited to the value of the shares that you have. There are other constructions around limited partnerships and limited liability partnerships, which Nigeria just introduced. Again, it's like a sole business, which is a registered business in your name, but they've given the protection of limited liability. So if you have a partnership that would ordinarily have been your own skin in the game, that would ordinarily have been, if the partnership goes down, you go down with it. Now the law has allowed you to protect yourself such that your liability again is limited to what you signed up for in the partnership. There are also companies limited by guarantee. These companies do business, but they don't distribute the profit. The profits that they make are for the promotion of the reason for which they were set up. So I'm trying to remember limited liability, limited by guarantee company. But many times some NGOs are like that. They could generate profit, profits by some activities and all of that, but it's not going to be distributed. It's going to go back into the reason for which they were set up. And then a more unusual arrangement is the unlimited company. In this case, the promoters are so sure of what they're doing that they're saying, if it goes down, we go down with it. Mobile Nigeria is unlimited because, I mean, they're so sure of the processes and everything they've tried in the past that they are confident that they can always make money. So that's the unlimited company. Like I said, limited liability partnerships and limited partnerships have been given the protection of the law to ensure that your liability is still restricted to what you signed up for. A business name, on the other hand, which many people tend to have because it has a lower entry barrier and it has lower filing requirements, then means that, look, you're trading as Nwamaka and Sons Limited, but that is just the name to separate it, okay, to show that it's a business. If anything happens to that business, they're coming after you, they're coming after your car, they're coming after your house, they're coming after everything you own, because it is, in a business term, it is taking that you are the person that's running everything, you're the engine room. So if we're planning to scale up our business, as I know that many people would be, you may want to start with thinking, is it a business name that I really need? Or is it time to separate myself from this business so that my risks are reduced? Incorporated trustees are like charities. That's where most churches and mosques are registered. And it's just saying that we're not here for profit, we're just here for a common good, and we're going to focus on that good. We're not doing business. Okay, to the meat of the matter, governance for startups. You're a startup, you've heard all these things. How does it affect me? What should I be looking at? What should I focus on? And I will say to you quickly, it depends on the stage you are. As we'll see as we go further down, At different stages, there are different things that should be important to you. So as you're listening now, I would suggest that you start thinking through, evaluating by yourself, what stage am I? What should I have put in place? Are there some things from the previous stage that I should have paid attention to that I didn't, that I now need to put in place moving forward? So there are 4 stages in the startup's evolution from start to maturity. And the first stage is the ideation stage. This is pre-seed. This is when you're still conceiving of the ideas. There is a need in the market. We don't have sufficient ready to wear. People complain about tailors every day. People say, oh, at Christmas, your tailors are, if you don't give your tailor, at least for me, if you don't give your tailors your fabric by the 15th October, forget it. It's not going to come out in time. Oh, my fashion designer is always disappointing. They take on more than they can chew. And you sit back and say, I can solve this problem. There are things I can put in place. If I spend the whole year stocking up for Christmas period, people will always have needs. So how do I meet that need? There's a market for it. There's a large market. There are people that come into the country from abroad and they're going back and they want to buy what they're going to wear the following summer. You're sitting there and you're thinking, this is a problem, I can solve it. That's the ideation stage. It's all ideas. Now, what should you be focusing on at the ideation stage? Who am I going to work with? Am I going to walk this road alone? Who am I going to partner with? Now, if I take on partners, what are their roles? What are they bringing in? There's cash equity. There is sweat equity. That means perhaps you get a lawyer and the person is not bringing in money, but all the documents that you need to start your business, that you need to sign with people, the lawyer is going to do all your legal work. The lawyer is going to do it for a share of that business. There's so many arrangements. Start thinking to yourself, what do I need to put in place? Do I need debt? Do I need equity? And then, okay, the money and intellectual contributions should be specified. We tend to get, especially being creatives, we tend to get excited about our ideas and what we can do. We don't focus so much on the business side of things. And that's how people run into trouble, not because they didn't have a brilliant idea, but because they didn't focus, they didn't look enough on the business side. They're focusing so much on the product. Now, if it's equity, define the equity interest of each person. How much am I taking? How much is the next person taking? Sometimes they're difficult conversations, but it's good to have them at the beginning. Not that when the business is starting to do well, then we start to shift the goalpost and everybody's upset. So good governance practice will be able to establish in advance the requirements or conditions to be met by each partner to receive his equity interest. Are you saying you're giving 40% to that person, but the person is only paying 10% from the beginning? So how are you going to call for the remaining 30%? At what point do you anticipate you call for the remaining 30%? Or are you saying 40% upfront or nothing? Be clear. Then establish the rules for joining and withdrawing from the company. Look, many times you need a lawyer when you're starting out. People don't like to hear it. Lawyers are not just for problems. Lawyers are to avoid problems happening. So establish the rules. If you're not clear, speak with your lawyer. This is what I'm thinking. How can I protect myself? How can I protect my idea? Which is the next thing. How can I make sure that someone doesn't listen to this idea that I have and run away with it? This idea is so groundbreaking. How do I ensure that whoever I'm speaking with is not going to circumvent me and run with it on his own? Those are the things you should think about at the ideation stage. Ideas are beautiful, but make sure you protect your ideas. That's what this stage is about. The early stage is when you're entering the market. You're validating, it's also called the validation stage, because you're validating these assumptions that you have. You're starting to see whether it would work or it would not work. You're testing the market with the product or the service. at this stage, the startup's product, the minimum viable product, is the market is starting to undergo testing, experimentation. Okay, who is my target market? I've tried to push this product at these people. I keep getting resistance. Am I focusing on the wrong people? Is there another market I should be looking at? Okay, so perhaps it's the younger people. So perhaps I should do more affordable products that would appeal to younger people. Or younger people are more environmentally conscious. If I say that this is biodegradable, it doesn't deplete the environment, it doesn't do this, will I be connecting with my target market? Those are the things you're examining at the early stage, because you've set out, you're starting to see how the market is responding, and you're modifying your thoughts as you go. Now, at this stage, what should you be focused on governance-wise? Company setup and organization rules. You already have an organization. How are we going to be set up? And when I say organization, you don't have to be 10 people. You don't have to be 20 people. You can have 14 members. You have an organization. You need to plan how you're going to work, how you're going to be set up. Organizing practices regarding potential key employees. So you realize that I have a tailor that gets me, that can run with any idea that I have. Ask yourself, if this person leaves today, what's going to happen to the business? Do I have an understudy in place already? Do I have someone that can take over? If this person says, I'm done with you, or if anything happens to that person, you need to start recognizing who the key employees are, how to keep them happy, and how to avoid being held ransom if anything happens to that key employee. You need to start thinking about your relationship with customers. Do you need a customer-facing employee that knows how to handle customers, take questions, and all of that? Who are your strategic partners? Who are the people you should be working with? What are the kind of connections in the industry you should be looking to make? Those are the questions you should start asking yourself at this stage. So it's important for founders to map out how new partners and investors would come into the market, into the company. So your company is starting to, take on a life of its own. If you're bringing in an investor, how are you going to structure it? Are you giving the investor equity in the company, or you're saying, no, just give us some money? You're not taking any shares in the company. Give us money and we'll pay the money back, because we're so sure that this business can pay back its debt. How are you going to be resolving disputes? Because that's very important. We have seen businesses that have been torn apart because they didn't manage disputes well. How will disputes be resolved? By the members, disputes among members, disputes among directors, even with the employees. What are you going to put in place? Start planning your business like it's going to be a big deal, because it is a big deal, because all big deals start small. Again, if you haven't paid attention to intellectual property protection, now is the time to pay attention to it. Protect your intellectual property, your patents, your designs. And if you started out with it's an ongoing thing. If you started out with some designs and you've come up with more, protect them. I know that's something we don't do a lot in Africa. And we see people grumbling and complaining, that was my design, it was copied and all of that. As much as you can protect them. The growth stage is the next stage. At this point, you have found your footing. You know who you are. You know what you're doing. The market has come to recognize you. You have tested your product. It's been validated. Now your focus is on getting new members, new customers, getting new employees, and increasing revenue, because you know that this is a winner. We have found our product. Now, what do you do here? Establish a board structure. At this point, it's beyond you. You need to establish a group of people, a board, that would help with decision making. You can't make all the decisions by yourself. You can't be the only voice for the business. Establish a board structure for strategic support. You need to bounce off ideas of people. This is what I'm thinking. Is this how we're supposed to go? And you should surround yourself with people that can say it as it is. Not people who wants to sit on the board because, oh, this is a company that's about to become a big deal and I'm going to get a lot of money out of sitting on the board. No, people who are interested and are going where you're going, who can tell you, no, 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 you absolutely cannot do that. That's not what you should be looking at this point. This is not staying true to what we set out to do. Surround yourself with those people. Define the hierarchy of decision-making. We all can be decision makers. In every serious organization, you would always have that. For instance, where in PwC, if a client says, oh, this is what I'm looking at, as a director, I can give X amount of discount in fees. If you're asking for more than that, I need to move it on to my partner. As a manager can say, okay, I can give X amount in discount. So let's say a manager can give 5% in discount. A director can then use the discretion to give 10, 15% in discount. We have agreed that any discount 20% and above has to come from a partner. That's just an example. You should have that kind of hierarchy in decision-making in your firm, in your business. Everybody cannot make the decision. Everybody cannot have the final say on anything. No. Then you have to evolve your business and control practices. We know more than anything that control is also a major thing that kills businesses. If you're making juice and you're rolling out 500 bottles a day, how come your revenue, and you're selling out, how come your revenue is reflecting 250, 300 bottles? There's a leakage somewhere. Or you sell 500 bottles. How come when you're doing reconciliation, somehow the reconciliation doesn't add up? You need controls. And many of these things that we say we need can be outsourced. So there are many service providers that recognize that, look, startups cannot by themselves afford an internal auditor or HR function sitting in them. So I can offer this service to 10 startups, and it won't cost you, it will cost you only a fraction of having a sitting HR department. These services are available all over the place. So don't say, oh, that's more expensive. I know a baker, she's a friend because I bake as a hobby. She has a HR firm that sorts all her HR issues, and the amount she pays is ridiculous. So people have excuses. Oh, I can't come in today, speak with HR. Or I can't do this today, speak with HR. Oh, I need a little advance, speak with HR. She's not worrying about those things. She's just focusing on churning out cakes, but she has an HR department that's sorting it, and it's not sitting with her because they're working for 10, 15 other companies. So everybody wins. And then the final stage is the expansion stage, just scaling up. This is where we all want to be. Everyone is taking your business seriously. Everybody wants to be like you. Things are moving even faster than you thought they would. You need more staff. You need to push more products in the market, perhaps expand your product offerings and things like that. What are the things you should consider at this point? The policies, ensuring that the policies are well established. Ensure they're well established. Ensure you have an ethics code. Look, many businesses, for instance, you're a garment company and the military says, come and make military wear. Many times, and we've seen this with many of our clients, they have a set of policies that you need to demonstrate that you have sitting in your company. Anti-bribery, whistleblowing, all sorts of ethics, anti-harassment, sexual harassment and all those things. There's so many policies. Put those things in place. Again, you don't have to draft them yourself. A good HR company, a good lawyer can put these things and you have them. And you make sure all your employees know them, because it's not so much as having these things as them being living in your company. Your employees know them and they live by them. If we say we do not bribe, we do not bribe. If we say we have zero tolerance for bullying, that is what it is. And even if you're the most valuable staff on my payroll, if you bully someone, you're on your way out. And everybody knows that. You need to put those things in. That is the only way a business can be taken seriously. You should have a code of conduct for your employees. If resumption time is 8 o'clock, it is 8 o'clock. If you come in at 8:15, you're late. If you come in at 8:30, there's a different kind of, policy that governs that. You can say that coming at 8:30 twice and it's a warning letter. Have those things in place and be true to them. That is one of the problems that people also have. You have these things, oh, they're sitting down somewhere, but you don't give life to them. Your sister works with you, and so you make exceptions for your sister all the time. And you sort of segregate classes of employees. No one is going to take you seriously. Then you must have a succession plan. The business has grown bigger than you. How do you ensure that this business continues living? Many businesses start, I think that 80%, I can't remember the statistics, hardly go beyond the first 5 years. 80. So how do you ensure your business lasts, and not just lasts, outlives you? Because that's the hallmark of a well-run business. How do you ensure it lives beyond you and your children and your children's children reap the benefits? That is succession planning. You need to put it in place from the beginning. If your children are little, who's your trusted ally that you can put through the ropes and learn the business? And you know that you have well-documented agreements with that person. Perhaps you have shares, perhaps you don't have shares. You're running this on these terms. Always think of those things. Some of these conversations are not easy. They need to happen. You need to improve your shareholder and investor relations because there are more people interested in the business. It's likely you've expanded. It's likely you have bankers you have to report to. If you have terms of loans, be sure that there's someone keeping an eye on those terms to ensure that you don't run foul of the terms of the facility you were given. If you have debenture holders, if you have shareholders, be sure that you're doing right by them per time and you're keeping an eye on your obligations to every key stakeholder. Again, improve internal control and management. Because you're big now, you can't see everything as you used to see them before. What are you putting in place to ensure that in every department you have an eye? Do you have a whistleblower policy? Do you protect your whistleblowers? Do you ensure that if there's anything that is said, action is taken and the whole company recognizes that a decisive action was taken on this thing? Sometimes it's one single action that'll make everybody take you seriously. Like, we're not here to joke. We're here for business and we mean business. Those are the things you need to put in place to help yourself. So these slides, the Nigerian Code of Corporate Governance, we're putting there mostly for technology startups, because although the code is for public companies, technology startups are required by nature of what they do to abide by the scope as well. So many times there's an infusion of everything with technology these days. So you could have technology infused in what you do. You may want to start thinking of how to implement the provisions of the code. And again, it's always a nice to have. You're not mandated to go by the code, but the code was put in there because they have seen it work many times. So going by the code is saying that we recognize that this is best practice, and by our own selves, we are voluntarily guiding and tailoring our business in line with this code. I don't think there's any stronger demonstration of seriousness. So the code applies to all public companies, private companies that are holding companies of a public company. So if, for instance, First Bank is held by a private company and First Bank PLC is a subsidiary, so the holding company is still regulated by the code. Privatized companies, like all these things that government is privatizing, and then regulated private companies, which is where I talk about the technology companies. So this is just nice to have information for us on how it is expected that a company would run. for Nigeria, it is apply and explain philosophy. So unlike the US, and I said I was going to talk about this, the US mandates every company that's caught up in the requirement, you must do these things. The UK says, no, you don't have to do them. It's nice to do them. We would prefer that you do them. And if you're not doing them, then you need to specifically explain to us why you're not doing them. Nigeria, as always, we're always blending half UK, half US. We're saying we would rather you apply and then you explain the reason you're applying. That's our midpoint. And that's what South Africa does as well. South Africa and Mauritius, that's the same methodology that we've all embraced. Like, apply the code and explain why, so that it is clear that there's a reason behind this structure that we have, there's a reason behind this decision we make. So it's a principle-based code. Apply means that all principles specified in the code are ideals, and you should strive to do them. They're like the minimal and fundamental things that you need to put in place. And then companies should also provide explanations for the recommended practices that they've chosen to imbibe. So these are just the different stages and the different provisions of it. I can share the slides and go into further details later if you want them, if you're particularly interested in the code. Now, I know we're from all over Africa, so let's ignore Nigeria at the moment, or let's not focus on Nigeria. Nigerians can participate. How would you describe governance in your country right now? Considering everything we've said about governance, it's not a one-man show. There should be controls in place. There should be policies that everybody would adhere to, things along those lines. From what you understand of governance, how would you describe governance in your country right now? Let's get typing.
Comments are yet to come in.
Okay.
You said we ignore Nigeria, but Nigeria, you said lawless. Someone else, substandard. Governance in my country is falling apart. Complicated.
Oh, wow.
Dismal.
Yep.
Inconsistent, corrupt. Fragmented and corrupt. Governance in Ghana can be described as a cumbersome process. South Africa not working.
Wow.
Cameroon, it's just not succeeding.
Wow.
They are flowing. All people are pissed off. I don't know if I can keep up.
That is really sad.
Full of corruption.
Oh, wow. You see, that's really sad. And that's like the general story. And unfortunately, we keep hearing that we get the leaders that we deserve. Because many times you look at the way people run their own companies, and at least I see people being totally unreasonable. You're a totally unreasonable employer. And I think to myself, and you complain about government. This is your own government. This is your opportunity to do right by everybody. But you can't sit back doing these things and then complain about government. No, it starts from all of us. So run your company as though it's a country. And all the things you complain about your country, you don't want to see it in your company. That's because we all seem to have the same sentiment around government that we see, and we know the impact. I mean, in Nigeria, the average person will tell you, I'm my own local government. I don't know why I'm paying taxes. I fix the road to my house. I generate my own electricity with inverter generator and solar. I get my own water. I do everything by myself. What is government doing for me? We have those kind of sentiments. Let's run our companies better. Let's run our companies like we need this to succeed. And we're not just there to grab as much money as we feel our politicians are doing. Grab your money and, when we're done, we pack up and go. So the regulated startups, like I said, part of the code applies to private companies like all of us, but that are working within the regulated space, mostly tech companies. So there must be a board structure, there must be chairman of the board. All these are to ensure that you're not making arbitrary decisions, to ensure that the decisions you're making, they're informed and they're for the good of the company. I won't dwell on this, but as we have said, these are the policies. You should have these policies. Risk management. Have we identified the risks that this business involves? If there's no electricity, and it doesn't have to be fancy. If there's no electricity, how does it impact on our business? So what are we doing about it? If one person, who are the key people on that I need for this business to keep going? How do I ensure that at every point in time, these 4 people, 5 people, there's a replacement for them, or they're available to work, or whatever it is that you need to keep the business going. Something as simple as how many people have keys to the company. If there's a strong room in the company, for instance, and there are 3 locks, who are the 3 people that are going to have the key? If we're going to have sign-in rights to documents, to bank accounts, who are the people that would have sign-in rights? You know, things like that. Internal audit, how do I ensure that the things I can't see, someone else is seeing them and bringing them to my attention? How do we ensure that whistleblowers don't get into trouble? How do we leave an enabling environment to ensure that people are comfortable to come forward, even if it is anonymous, to bring to our attention what's going on in the company? And what do we do about it when these things are brought to our attention? So I'm rushing through because I know that we need time for questions. Sustainability, I had talked about it. It's not just about environment, it's about safety. What is this? Do you have a safe working culture in your company? How safe is it for people? Do you say that people should work, oh, it's Christmas time, people have to work till 1 a.m. and then they must go home like that at 1 a.m. on the streets? Is that the best work environment? Or do you have like an apartment within your company that people can sleep, good, comfortable apartment that they can sleep and refresh if they have to work over? Do they get paid for extra work? Do you say, oh, it was a slow year, you weren't doing anything and you're getting your salary now, it's December, you better, you know, pull your weight and work 7 days a week, 24 hours a day or 20 hours a day? Is that what you're, that's not a safe work environment. What's the working condition? What do we see as our responsibility to the environment, to our people, to our shareholders? Okay, case study, sustainable, sorry, this is in Mariama Fashion Production. Okay, her workshop educates artisans on the importance of sustainable dyeing practices. Those are examples of sustainable businesses that are being run. Because, oh, dyeing practices has historically, oh, some negative connotation and all of that, but we're saying that it's possible to do these things properly. Soko Kenya uses an upcycled, recycled, almost zero waste approach in its production. Again, these businesses, if you see this business, you see Soko Kenya approach the bank for a loan or approaches World Bank for a grant, and you see someone who's running business exactly as business as usual. I promise you, the World Bank is more likely to give grants to Soko Kenya because they're thinking sustainability. And that is something we cannot ignore in the world that we are right now. That's where the world is going. If you wonder, even oil and gas companies that historically have the dirtiest practice are cleaning up their acts, changing how they're running their business for sustainability purposes. Revival Resurrection collects and upcycles solid wastes in Lagos. So those are some of the examples of, you know, sustainability. Then there's transparency. Whenever your books are being called upon, you must be able to explain every line for every figure that's in your book and every decision that you made. Simple. And in conclusion, corporate governance is not a matter of right and wrong. It's more nuanced than that. You need to do your bit of good where you are. It's those little bits of good put together that overwhelm the world, from one of my favorite people, Desmond Tutu. So as we said, if you do not like how your company, your country is being run, don't run your company like that. Put in place what will make you look back and be proud of the work that you've done beyond the talent that you have. I know I've done a lot of talking and eaten into the time for the questions, but please, do we have any questions?
Thank you, Olekan. There's quite a number of questions which have come in. Maybe we can start with small business support. There's quite a number of those. What type of deals can you structure with a lawyer if you don't have money to pay them their rate? That's around setting up the business governance.
Okay. There are different things you can get. There's different ways you can engage a lawyer. And there are different lawyers. First of all, I would say to a small company, you don't always need the biggest names, the biggest law firms. I'll tell you, you can do that when you get into your stage 4, that's fine, or stage 3. I'll tell you, there are smart lawyers everywhere. They may be standalones, they may be smaller law firms that are just struggling to get their names known, but there's smart lawyers everywhere. So many lawyers are more affordable than you think. You just haven't spoken with them. Another way to manage the cost is define clearly what you would want the lawyer to do. Sometimes there are lawyers that even have the arrangement that if you have a draft, I can review and make it better. That's going to cut short how much time the lawyer is spending on the engagement. So for instance, these policies and all of that, if you say, I want to have a whistleblowing policy today, and you open 4 or 5 pages on Google, I promise you, you can start to piece together what looks good to you, send it to the lawyer and say, it's a review that I need. You don't need to generate these things from scratch. If you need a shareholders agreement, make it clear that it's just a shareholders agreement that I need, and I need it to speak to XYZ. It's not a retainership. We can have a retainership agreement on ad hoc basis. So I will send you 10 questions or 10 engagements in a year. As against, oh, you're on my retainer, I call you 247, 365 days a year. That's going to cost you more. So if you're clear on the most important things you need your lawyer for, then delineate it clearly. This is how much I need from the lawyer, and then look for a smart lawyer that does not have to belong to one of the biggest firms. I promise you, there are good lawyers out there that are interested in supporting small businesses, because everybody recognizes that some small businesses become a big deal. And if you start out supporting them from the beginning, you grow with the business. So you can always access a good lawyer.
Thank you for that, Olaitan. We have another question that has come right about now. My question is, do you have a list of examples of companies you can refer for risk management and internal control consultants that an SME can engage with, similar to outsourced HR companies?
Okay, depending on what stage you are and the size of the company, PwC is always happy to help, because we have we've sort of started a product that's tailored at small businesses. We recognize that many of our rates are not affordable to businesses that are just starting out. So we're starting to, there's a team that's being put together that's starting to help small businesses with these things. So I can perhaps get the details to Naomi later on the team to engage. That much I can say. I can't readily recommend anybody else, of course, for obvious purposes, but I'm sure that Naomi's team can also help, so that at least you can have options.
Thank you for that. So still around small business support, Globally, the IP aspect of fashion has been challenging. I'm thinking about how the China factories tend to knock off designer or even fast fashion brands stealing from small independent producers. These big organizations still do not feel legal repercussions under copyright infringement. How, as small businesses, do we protect our ideas?
Okay, thank you for that. I think the first thing to do to even be able to claim that you've disrespected my copyright is to register it. So if you don't have a registered interest, anybody can run with it. And if there's a big business that of course, you get a lawyer to write them and say, this was registered XYZ period. This is the design. This is the product that you launched XYZ period. This is the design. It is clearly, there's a clear connection. Then you can start to have the conversation. I'm not saying they would always do right by you, because the copyright, the intellectual property space is evolving. And like you said correctly, many people don't even have the energy to pursue because they're going to trample upon me. But no, people are starting to get results. And at the very least, you get compensated. If they don't want a lot of noise, you get compensated. And you can make a lot of noise because it's your intellectual property. It's not easy. It's not something that you can pick up. It's your sweat and blood, literally. So unless we start making examples of, unless we start going after, unless we take it that this is my business and I take it seriously, nobody's going to take it seriously on your behalf. So register your designs and go after whoever it is that's infringing on them. And if they don't want to listen, put it out there. Let it be clear. Companies will take you seriously, big companies, when they see that, oh, you're not going to go away. That's how it works. But we start by even protecting what is ours, not, oh, nothing is going to happen. Okay?
Thanks for that, Olaitan. We've gotten a question here about registering IP outside one's country. Is it possible to register your IP outside your jurisdiction, outside the country of your origin?
Yes, it's very possible. Your IP, you can have internationally registered. Okay, so there are different regimes. Some people will recognize IPs registered in X place as being binding on them, but many times you can register if you want a specific, if you want a global protection, register in as many as you can. And it's not as cumbersome as we think. Get a lawyer to help with these things. But yes, you can have an international IP, and that's why big brands protect their IP wherever it is, whether or not they're locally domiciled in that country.
Thanks for that. We're getting some really specific questions around IP. There's something to do with categories of IP in Kenya. The Intellectual Property Protection Body has a regulation that some fashion designs aren't patentable, e.g. jewelry designs. How does one circumvent that?
So because trademark design registrations and all that, they have classes. So if your country does not recognize a class, perhaps, number one, get a lawyer that can look at it and see if you fit into another class, because many times what you want to register can fit into 2 or 3 classes. So look for the class that is most suitable for you. And then if there's absolutely not, and you still want to register your interest, you can register it in another country that recognizes it, just to ensure, because many times what that also does is that, because many of the infringement that we see happen online, you access them online. So you can say that, well, on this platform, I saw this, so you can go after them. So register in the UK, if it's possible, register in the US or somewhere in the EU and have your interest protected. What you don't want to do is to not protect it at all. So if the class is not available in your country, find where it is available, or find a lawyer that can advise you on an alternate class that you can register it under.
So another question about selection of a lawyer. Should we completely trust any lawyer? Is it sure that he will always give us the best advice?
A lawyer has no reason to not want to give you the best advice. I'll be biased towards lawyers, but I'd also say quickly that most things, and personally, this is me talking personally, I like most things to be based on referrals. If you have used this service before, then tell me about it. And then I'm not going to find a lawyer on Instagram and say, come and help me. It's safer you go through someone who can say, oh, I use this person XYZ to incorporate the company or to make a filing, and I think they're reliable. And you should interview your lawyers, speak with your lawyers, ask them questions, ask difficult questions. And if you're not comfortable with your lawyer, you don't have to stay with that person. That's the truth, because your lawyer is supposed to be your trusted ally. If it looks like the person is not serving your interests or is wasting time or is not prioritizing your business, cut the person off, get another person.
Thank you for that, Oletan. So there's another question around IP registration versus business registration. Does registering my business as a limited company automatically cover ownership of business name, or do I have to still go ahead and register intellectual property of my business name, domain, etc.?
Oh, they're not the same thing. You still, if you have a peculiar name you want to stick to, you want to protect, it's different from registering your business name. So you still have to register that trade name.
Thank you. We've had this repeated question. Also, under Nigeria law, can one convert a name or a business to liability? So the repeated question has been, how do business entities transition from the state that they are in to a limited liability?
Okay, so it's possible, and the process is simple. The problem is when you want to register a limited liability company, it's going to tell you the name is not available because a business name is already using the name, although that business name is yours. So you would need to write a letter under the business name authorizing the use of that name for the limited liability company. File that with our own CAC, I guess, whatever is the name of your corporate registry or company's registry. And it's as simple as that. So you can transition, but you also need to speak with your accountant, preferably your tax people, to know the implications of transitioning. Also note that there will be increased reporting requirements, annual filings and all of that with a limited liability company. But the world opens up significantly once you become a limited liability company. There's some businesses you cannot bid for instance, under a business name. There's some contracts you cannot win because you're not registered as a company. So it's a business decision, and you need to decide based on where you are at the moment. If you're just starting out, you may not need a limited liability company. You may be fine with your business name. So it depends on where you are and what you're hoping to achieve.
We're having a lot of questions around structuring of agreements, IP, and technical related questions, which we will definitely not be able to cover all of them in this session. Mm-hmm. But we have a question here that was asked earlier, which says, when do you know when to let go of a business? Where is the line between hanging on with hopes for the future and realizing that the business needs to end?
That's probably a question for the business strategy people. But honestly, if we're clear on what the motive, and that's why we should always have a plan, we should always have a why. If we're clear on why the business was set up and the timelines that we had set in place, and it's not looking like it's happening, we need to step back and realize, is there something we need to tweak? Is there something we need to do more of? Is there something we need to do less of? Should we move things around, or should we cut loose completely? So after you've done the tweaking and it looks as if things are not making the kind of sense you require, you should ask yourself, are we getting it wrong, or is the market not just ready? Sometimes you have a good product, but the timing is wrong. is the market not just ready before you make a decision? So you must have done or checked all your assumptions before you decide, at this point, we need to move on.
Thank you. At this point, Olaitan, I'll ask you to pick any two questions you see in the chat, then we will move on to the closing session.
Okay. Oh my goodness. I see 670. Let's see. I'm thinking how to set up a whistleblowing policy. Can you give us an example in relation to a small business? So, for instance, you can tell, perhaps, let's say you have a what's this QR code thing, and you say, oh, people scan and it will take you to XYZ page, and you can drop whatever comment you want to drop. What you need for whistleblowing is always, people need to be sure that it's anonymous, and people need to be sure that I'm not going to get into trouble with it. You can have a dedicated phone line, for instance. Nobody's going to ask who's calling or anything. Just drop the information. You can have a dedicated web page. Nobody's gathering any information. Nobody's going to ask for the name of who's dropping the information. You can drop your comment. Anonymity is important for many people when they want to do whistleblowing. And if you've provided the information and it requires, the nature of what you've talked about requires that you need to be spoken to, or your identity can, for instance, if there are 3 people in a finance department and there's an allegation that there's a collusion between 2 people, it's almost easy to guess that perhaps the person who blew the whistle is the 3rd person, because the person knows sufficiently. You need to ensure that in your whistleblowing policy, there's a non-retaliation policy. Whoever made the comment or talk must not suffer for it. And if there's so apart from taking action about what was talked about, you should have a follow-on protection for whoever blows the whistle. It's important for any whistleblowing policy. It's not easy, and that's why we don't see that coming up a lot of times, but it is important because it could save you a lot and you need to create the environment as well. Let people know that you need to speak up and you won't get into trouble for it. As a startup business in fashion, what structure is best to go for? Again, it depends on where you are and where you're hoping to go. You can start with a simple registered business name until you find your footing and go as far as you can with that. Then when it's time to scale up, you can move on to a limited liability company. When engaging services of a lawyer, is it wise to let the lawyer sign a non-disclosure agreement to ensure they keep the company secrets, e.g. internal operations of the business and all? No, you don't need a non-disclosure with a lawyer because the duty of confidentiality goes with our trade. However, it wouldn't hurt you to do so. I'm more particular about non-disclosure when you're talking to investors and other people you're talking to about your business. Those are the people that really need the non-disclosure, because it is important that whatever ideas you're putting on the table, whatever plans you have that you're running by them, they do not disclose and they do not circumvent. So you should have a non-disclosure, non-circumvention agreement that says you won't go behind my back and run with my idea to make it yours. So unfortunately, I can't take all the questions. What I can do is there's a regulatory data card that my team generated in PwC that sort of runs through the business types, different kinds of registrations and all of that. I'll send it to Naomi and she can share so that at least we start to have a good grasp of the fundamental things for running a business. Okay, back to you, Naomi.
Thank you so much, Olaitan, for the wonderful and quite educative session. We look forward to receiving the additional learning materials on the Moodle platform for all our participants. Thank you so much. And I bet you can see in the chat the gratitude coming in and flowing in. Thank you very much. So now we have reached the end of today's session. We'll be sharing any answers to the unanswered questions that are currently in the chat box, in the additional learning materials where possible. If you have any question which you feel that it's burning and you need it addressed, please send it to Fashionomics Help Desk at cchubnigeria.com. Please remember, tomorrow is a big day for all of us, and we'll be participating in the Fashionomics Africa online programs. That will be both for the incubator and accelerator, as this will be our first Founders Day to be hosted at 11 a.m. West African time, 12 p.m. Central African time or South African Standard Time, and 1 p.m. East African time. Details of the program and timings have been communicated and will be shared again on the WhatsApp group. If you're on this Zoom call and you're not on the WhatsApp group, please again send an email to Fashionomics Help Desk at cchubnigeria.com and we will add you onto the WhatsApp group. And now for the surprise, we ran a raffle in the first interactive session of the icebreaker, and out of all the participants who were there, my colleague Wanjiko, how many participants, do we have a tally of how many participants were in the raffle? As we're waiting for Wanjiko's answer, I'm going to go ahead and just quickly announce the winner. So the donation is from today's facilitator, Ms. Olaitan Adedeji, and it's a very generous donation of United States dollars 250. And the winner for this today is Lillian Correa from Malawi. Is Lillian Correa from Malawi on the call? Labake, can we see her? Can you pin her? Is she here? Well, if she's not here, we will be reaching out to her. So today, Lillian Correa, you are the lucky winner of $250 from Miss Olaitan Adedeji. So that was a surprise.
Congratulations, Lillian.
Yes. Thank you. With that, we will see you all again tomorrow for Founders Day. Please be there promptly. Again, Founders Day will go on for 2 hours and it starts at 11 a.m. if you're in West Africa. Time zone for Central Africa and South Africa would be 12 p.m. and for East Africa, 1 p.m. So again, see you there tomorrow, and remember, Founders Day is mandatory for you to be again shortlisted to the final 25 who will undergo pitch training. So see you tomorrow for Founders Day, and congratulations, Lillian. We will be reaching out to you after this. Goodbye.